Once again, let's adventure into the realms of Dungeons and Dragons.
Sounds like you want to talk about the next episode of the D&D cartoon.
I sure do. That would bring us to episode 5, In Search of the Dungeon Master, for the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm hanging out with this nerd as usual.
Nerdarchy Ted.
Hey, maybe it's your first time hanging out with us in Ted's basement. It's a place where we like to discuss news, views, and homebrews for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Sometimes we even talk about other role-playing games.
So if you don't want to miss a single video, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and to tune to that notification bell.
Alright, so episode 5, we're going to get into it, what we can learn and take away from the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon and interject into our own 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. I mean, I'm sure you could use it for any edition of D&D, but we just so happen to be playing 5th edition.
So this one, is In Search of the Dungeon Master, because the Dungeon Master actually gets kidnapped. Now, that in and of itself is a interesting twist, and the first time that we're really seeing the Dungeon Master really interacting with more than the party,
the adventure, if you would.
Right. So this is where the whole concept of all right, is the DM really there, not there? Well, here he is. So this is more of an interesting and a kind of a peel back scenario, because there's a lot of groups out there that a DM or the Dungeon Master tends to, or can, have someone in the party or have someone that's an important NPC that they deal with. And we don't particularly care for that style of gaming. So I feel like this is a bad lesson here.
That's a bad lesson. I will say for the majority of the adventure, Dungeon Master is not participating. But at the most important parts, when we get to that, he does. So yeah, I could definitely see where you're coming from. Now, if they did this with a more modern take, I feel like it would be, Dungeon Master would be replaced with Elminster if you're in Forgotten Realms, or Fizbin if you're in Dragonlance. Yeah, but it's essentially that uber powerful character that's there. It's an NPC mostly and run by the Dungeon Master.
The episode starts off with them, trudging their way through a forest, and they've already had a conversation with the Dungeon Master based on what they're saying about, them trying to find their, the next clue in a forest with no trees.
Yeah, so, eventually, they kind of stumble upon this riddle really early on, or the solution, and Diana's like, oh, no tree, and we're thinking about it being spelled the wrong way.
Right.
Not no, but no, K-N-O-W.
So a Trent or a no tree winds up, coming to life, and it starts talking to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the sense this could be a Trent, or this could be just an enchanted forest with trees that talk. We don't really know, but these trees do seem knowledgeable, or the one they're talking to anyway, and actually has information about their world, so it knows more than just what's going on in the magical realms of Dungeons and Dragons here.
So with that, they begin having conversations, and Presto is quizzing them about who won the World Series, and it's pretty amusing. But in the meantime,
I call it BS. No nerd should know about sports ball.
But the Dungeon Master, starts, riding up on a, was it a snail?
Yeah, it was a giant snail with a pixie companion.
And, it really looks like, he's, in the same space as the party, but they're engrossed with the tree. And before you know it, the bullywugs leap out and try and capture Dungeon Master.
Yeah, I think it's more like a split scene, and he's on the way to them, but not quite there yet.
He says a line that looks like he's interacting with what they've just said, which is what...
He is, but I take it as he's off in the distance, and maybe hasn't appeared yet or whatever. But yeah, close enough where maybe the kids should have heard the battle, but who knows, he might have super Dungeon Master hearing, or just, omnipotence about what's going on. And you're right, he talks about them interacting with the no trees, and he faces off against the bullywugs and Warduke, and he gets captured.
So here we have this takeaway. It doesn't have to be a DMPC. It could be an NPC that is kind of important to the story, but having an NPC that gets captured is a a staple, a norm for D&D, and a crux of many different adventures. So it's like, oh, we have to rescue this person, so it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's definitely a time-honored trope that works very well back then as well as now. So yes, having NPCs captured, especially ones that are important to your quest, is a nice way of inserting a side quest. Even if you didn't really, even if you really doesn't fit with your main quest, because it doesn't have to. The whole point is they need this NPC. NPC has been removed from the board. They have to go get NPC in order to bring things back.
So this is one of the easy takeaways from this particular moment. So then the pixie companion winds up coming and talking to the party, and it winds up that Sheila has the ability to understand.
Yeah.
And she had no clue. All of a sudden, she's like, "Oh yeah, I know what they're saying."
She understands a noise speak because that's what the pixie was definitely speaking. It'd be like, and then you'd get a word. But yeah, so basically in this case, the pixie becomes the quest giver, lets them know, hey, I know where Dungeon Master is. He's been captured. Follow me. They go through that. I don't know if it's a random encounter with the Sphinxes. I don't know if they're considered Sphinxes. They look like manticores without spiky tails, only slightly less evil.
Well, they wind up getting to a cliff edge, and it's like, okay, we'll just fly over, because that's what the pixie's saying. Is like, oh, we don't have wings here. So like it wound up becoming tricky when Presto's hat comes flying off his head as he tries to conjure some way to get across. The hat winds up flying back, along with what looks to be a group of manticores. Manticores in D&D have always been insanely evil monsters that want to tear the flesh from living things. So I don't know what the animators decided to do here. Nothing winds up talking. So they could have been Sphinxes. They could have been something else. Maybe it was Presto's magic who charmed them somehow. I don't know.
Regardless, flying lions with people-ish looking faces appear, pick them up, take them to the other side. It could have been his magic. It could have been Maybelline. I don't know. So it was definitely a fun scene, and it was I kind of look at it almost like their eagle moment from Lord of the Rings, except for with flying lions.
Absolutely. So magical moments aside, I think there's other things that are magical out there that we might want to tell our fans about.
Sure, absolutely. If you want to add some extra magic to your game, we have Secrets of the Vault over on the Nerdarchy store. It's a PDF digital product full of new magic items for your game, but that's not all we have over there.
So we also have some awesome 3D printed materials and enamel pins.
Absolutely. Whether you want miniatures or terrain, we've got you covered. Full dungeon rooms, you name it, it's over there. And we also have a bunch of other digital products. So if you're interested in the stuff that we created here at Nerdarchy, you can go over to Nerdarchy, the store, and look at those products.
There'll be a link down in the description.
All right, back into Dungeons & Dragons, the magical realm of...
All right, so, what can we learn from these Manticore-esque things wind up, coming to the party's aid?
Well, it's a good example of a random encounter that doesn't have to be combat. That could be this one actually combines the social pillar with the exploration pillar because they have to get across. And at the same time, you're introducing NPCs. Now, in this case, there isn't like a lot of interaction or whatever, but there could have been.
Right. And I show that as, also possibly being another step. Absolutely putting, a nice role-playing encounter in there. It's like, all right, we'll take you or we'll ferry you across. But, it doesn't come cheap. Oh, well, we don't have any money. Well, it's not money we're looking for. How about some information? How about a story? And, sometimes just coaxing your players into, telling them a story, made up or not, character background, something to inspire the NPCs into lending aid. That kind of puts them on the path of being able to role play and get into character, which is always something that I try to encourage, gaming with the kids. But it also, to me, shows, again, I'm seeing them as nothing but manticores. So I'm like, this is also using a monster against type. So whether it was Presto's magic, whether they're actually a good group of Manticores who have somehow magically lost, their stinger tail, you could have a group of monsters that are actually friendly, and it's like, well, we do want to, change people's opinions and establish your world as something different because you have something that is severely against what everyone else knows them to be.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts as well. You have an encounter which appears to be with scary monsters that turn out to not be the bad guys. They happen to be good guys that can interact with you in a friendly manner, and the whole encounter kind of goes against type. So that part is fun and interesting. It's a nice takeaway where you can kind of like do this build up and foreshadowing that your players have one idea, but then plot twist. Hopefully before people start attacking and killing each other. But it's an example of, well, there's opportunities to role play and talk, even if they appear to be monsters.
So, flying across, we have another dark cave to enter. The pixies wiggle in there, and Sheila of course translates, and here we have a decision moment because Eric doesn't want to go into another cave.
Yes, well, so there's actually a couple of takeaways that we can look at. One is, the player's character's opportunity to shine because they're the only one that has the language that can interact with the NPC. And this actually might be a great way to interact with a player that's a little more reserved and not as outgoing, because if you just happen to know everyone's languages and that player happens to have a language that no one else has, well, now they have to be the face and the voice for the party. You should know your players before you thrust anything on them or cram anything down their throat. But it would be a nice way to get them into the spotlight, get them to maybe do a little bit of role playing. Again, we have another awesome set piece, I would say, because the cave looks like kind of like a giant monster mouth. So that's one of the things that Eric's like, no, I am not going in there. And, he makes some quip about that thing looks like it could eat us, and it doesn't look like it brushes in between meals. And he's like, I'm out of here. So they actually split the party.
Now, I know what happens in my games when the party gets split. The games I typically play in, bad stuff usually happens. Now, I guess whoever's running this particular game decided to be really nice. Eric winds up, going through a variety of different encounters, and, we'll get back to him, but, literally, inches multiple times away from death, and he has no clue about it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like you said, we can jump back to his random encounters because there's a few and they're quite varied. The kids enter the cave, and right away they have their own random encounter.
So there's apparently a golem, an elemental, some kind of guardian, of the entrance, and they have to try and figure out a way to get past it. They don't typically fight things to the death in this show, so it's always how do we run away, how do we get away, or how do we get past?
Yeah, how do we outsmart it? How do we solve this problem? In this case, it kind of gets fixed for them. I believe the things that the elemental is working for, because to me it looks like an elemental, kind of show up. And I'm only guessing that it's working for them because they basically, as always, go from the fryer into the frying pan, as you would, and bam, orcs show up and grab them, capture them, and drag them back to their mines. So the kids get drugged back to the mines where they're immediately put to work. Their stuff is taken away from them, but
well, all but one of them gets captured.
All but one of them. Sheila gets away.
Sheila tries to use her cloak of invisibility, as she typically does, to distract the golem, the elemental, call it what you will. And so when she sends this thing on a chase against her, and I think it's more than a cloak of invisibility, because when she flips that hood up, I think she also teleports along with it, because as soon as she does this and the thing grabs her, she's not in that space. So it's really powerful. But she winds up, distracting the thing. It then has no clue where she is. The party gets captured, and she slips in with the orcs to be like, all right, I need to try and help my friends before the door, winds up closing on her.
Yeah, so, she actually has to enact an escape plan. In the meantime, the kids kind of strike an alliance with some dwarves that are also enslaved. And, she uses Uni to create a distraction in order to get the magic items back and give them to the kids. And they use it to break through a wall, which they learn from the dwarves. The dungeon master is being held on the other side of it. And, so they rush through the hole in the wall. Orcs pursuing them. Venger shows up. Warduke's there.
All right,
It's a whole party.
Well, before we go into escape plan mode, let's say what can we take away from their time with the dwarves?
That the dwarves speak in rhyme. No.
So I look at this. Well, it's true. You've got the dwarves in their typical rhyming verse, which is not the standard dwarf that I know and play. But my takeaway is, the whole time spent in the mine could be something that the party has a conversation together to working out a plan, even though it's one player doing this and one player doing that. This is a really good time for them to put their heads together and try to figure out, how do we defeat this problem? How do we find a solution to where we're at? It's another way to introduce an NPC ally that gives information and possibly takes the story a little bit further. I know that if I were doing this in my game, those dwarves, once they got out, I would have that become something. And for every one that they got rescued, oh, well, maybe there's maybe not so much a financial reward, but like, oh, well, maybe they'll, build something for the players. Maybe they'll do, this other quest, like there's lots of games out there where, towns get built and you need to find different jobs. Well, if you didn't rescue the blacksmith, well, then you don't have a blacksmith in your town. So you could do a lot of different things like that and have crucial NPCs that are needed within that allotment of dwarves. And, who are they willing to risk? How much are they willing to, put their own lives in jeopardy to make sure all the dwarves get out? To me, that's my learning moment there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, transfer information. They're able to build an alliance with the dwarves that could absolutely carry on after this whole adventure is over. So there's some different takeaways. Maybe an invitation back to the dwarven hold, and like you said, perhaps an opportunity to have master dwarves build them stuff. So they're all great takeaways.
All right, so now we get through the doorway and, we get to see where Dungeon Master is.
All right, so we see Dungeon Master. He's being held, but then we cut away to Eric, who is encountered a zombie or a ghoul. He's being chased by a giant snapping turtle. There is tentacles randomly showing up that he doesn't even notice.
I think at one point in time he's traveling through a swamp where the tentacles are, and it's like, all right, how far is this guy traveling that he's gone through all of these different terrains, or is literally the world that they're playing in that diverse in environment?
Well, Ted, it is the magical realms of Dungeons and Dragons.
It is indeed.
So with that, he's running around, he's running from things. And in the cave, Warduke and Venger kind of show up because Warduke sent for Venger's minion, the shadow creature that is kind of like his sidekick, to go get Venger because he wants to make a deal. And, so Venger shows up ready to take Dungeon Master. And, of course, he's extra happy because the kids are there and he always wants to get their magic items and they're actually ready to surrender them.
So this is when Eric, falls, from the ceiling, completely landing on top of Warduke, and, more craziness winds up ensuing.
Yeah, so Warduke advances to attack. Hank ends up shooting his sword out of his hands. It flies into Dungeon Master, breaking the enchantment that's holding him because he's kind of entrapped in like this crystal prison, which Warduke had used his sword to put him in, which that shatters. And now, Venger is kind of squaring off against Dungeon Master. And this is the first time in the series that we kind of see what Dungeon Master can do.
And, we saw a little bit in the beginning of the episode where he's having fun. He's like, I haven't fought bullywugs in years. But he's like, basically it's like hand wave. I got this. But against Venger, he's really got to, pull out the stops.
Yeah, Venger tries using his magic on him. Dungeon Master easily counterspells. But not only does he counterspell, but it's almost like a spell reflection. There's some quipping going on. Venger gets basically disincorporated, and Dungeon Master is like, we should leave. This isn't going to last long. And they do, but they're being chased by bullywogs, warduke, and orcs.
So as they're getting ready to leave, this is when, Erica's like, look, we can't leave yet. We need to free the dwarves.
Right, which is them like running to a hole in the wall and going, "Hey, dwarves, run!"
Well, which, again, here's the takeaway moment. I would not make it so easy. You gotta really put the challenge of like, okay, you know that you've only got a limited number of, rounds, minutes, seconds, what have you. How much are you willing to put at risk to try and save the dwarves? So
this could actually be a fun instance to incorporate a skill challenge, right? A skill challenge where the consequences are, not being able to free as many dwarves. You kind of brought that up earlier. Like the more dwarves you free, the better it is. Well, depending on what skills that your party has access to, you can have them make different rolls and decide how many successes they need before how many failures in order to complete this task. One way or another, it gets completed where I would say, yeah, they get out, but if they get all the failures, then and no successes, maybe none of the dwarves make it out. If they do really well, all the dwarves make it out. And you can kind of scale the rewards in the adventure based on that.
absolutely. Cut that. Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. You can really get in and have a lot of fun, with that moment. Fourth edition really brought, the idea of skill challenges to light, and we try to shine that example because it was a good takeaway from that edition.
Yeah, absolutely. If you search Matt Colville's channel, he does a really good video on skill challenges. I would definitely recommend looking at that. But this is a place where you would definitely be able to insert one and it would make a lot of sense. Now we get to see what you were really talking about as far as the DM player character. Not only did he give them that out against Venger, but when the horde is descending upon them and they're like kind of like, we're screwed, there's nothing we can do. Dungeon Master is like, I'm gonna kill everything with lava pretty much. And
like
he makes
volcano.
he makes the lava that was in the mines erupt out of everything, so it kind of cuts off the villains and they run away from the lava. And with that, that's where it kind of ends. And I think, again, that's an example of a terrible way to kind of do things. Like, you want your players to be able to really shine, so very rarely would you ever want them to have someone else do it for them. Maybe occasionally if the adventure is get person X to this place because they have a thing to do, but it's something you would want to use very sparingly. You want your players, the adventurers, to be the stars of their show.
It is an older style of running the game, and we are talking about a show that's many decades old at this point in time. I think I bought like the 25th anniversary edition on DVD, so I know it's got some age to it. But as you said, we can learn from that, and this is a point where we learn what not to do.
Absolutely. So with that, what do you folks think? Have you watched it? We got a place where we can discuss it down in the comments below. But before we head on out and before you head on down to the comments, I would like to invite you to join the Nerdarchy Adventuring Party over on Patreon. Hey, Ted, what can they expect over there?
We're creating products for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons every month for both players and DMs alike.
And also, Ted, don't forget, patrons automatically get entered into our giveaways.
And that's not all. We also have a live chat just for our patrons every week.
Quest down to the link in the description. Come part of the Nerdarchy Adventuring Party. And until next time,
Stay nerdy.